Hey everybody, today we're going to be taking a look at a fixed blade knife made by Case. So I don't got a whole lot of information on this knife. I picked it up at a old store that was closing down a handful of years back, but we're going to take a look at it, so stick with me. All right guys, for starters, we got a leather sheath. It's a decent little leather sheath. Decent weld on it, stitched, riveted, really generous belt loop. I like the snap closure on this one. It's another one that's designed to where if you have this thing on your side and you're walking through the brush, highly unlikely that that's going to accidentally unsnap on you. It's actually a pretty stout snap. Clip point design. Almost looks like a little miniature Bowie knife. I don't know how old this knife is either. But it's a Case Double X made in USA. And there's some... See if we get her to focus. Ooh. Kind of battling the light. There we go. If anybody wants to look that up, you're more than welcome. But get the profile there. She's quite narrow. Very well made. It's a pretty knife. But yeah, this is another bad boy that is more of a dedicated huntsman kind of style. Let's see. Decently sharp. I've not done anything with this since I bought it, as you can tell from how mirror polished that edge still is. Handle's a little bit small. My pinky just kind of misses it. If you got average size hands, it'd probably just fit right, but I got pretty large hands. All right. Now, the main reason I kind of brought this out here the last little bit that we've been doing videos, we've been focusing on knives that weren't necessarily your traditional bushcraft survival knife kind of things, and this definitely falls in that category. Now, this would be potentially a knife or a type of knife that someone who's going hunting may actually have on their side. So I've been posing the question, if this is what you had on you, would it suffice? So as always, we're going to take this thing out here in a little bit, and we're going to just do a few basic field tests with it just to kind of see if it could cut the mustard. So stick with me, guys. Okay, now sometimes we may want a pole for a shoulder, or nothing else, maybe a walking stick. Now, this thing is super light. It is definitely not something I want to try to hack with, and I don't even want to try to batten this blade. It's really thin. So we'll take our potential stick that we want, this sapling here, and we're going to beaver chew this thing with this knife. So we're just going to put some pressure, and we're going to kind of cut into it a little bit. Now I'm going to bend it the other way. Get it off the other little tree beside of it. There we go. And we're off. Now we can use this as part of a shoulder, or we can trim it down to make us a little bit of a walking stick with. So either option would work just fine. Okay, now we got a lot of these little pieces here sticking on it. Very gently get some of them off there. So I'm not going for broke here. This is a fairly fine blade, so if I can snap them off, I'll snap them off. But we'll just gently start working them off. So there's a bigger one, so we can kind of come here. Just kind of cut that. Now that did make a bit of a sharp tip, so we'll probably want to come in and slowly work that off. There we go. Now we're getting down here where we might want to start to cut that off. So get that branch there removed. There we go. So we're getting the work done. We're not putting a lot of shock on this blade. Now, to imagine usually a lot of places out here, especially where I live, during deer season, that time of the year it actually gets fairly cold. So we're dealing with steel that's going to be affected by that really cold weather. That's another thing that definitely keep in mind. That's why we don't want to be abusive to this thin steel. We just want to get it to do what we need it to do. Okay, now we're getting down to where we're going to get this cut off at the end, separate it from the rest of the sapling. Left a little bit more room to work in there. There we go. Now, we'll do about the same thing we did with our other ones in a sense, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to deeply score it. We'll go all the way around. And be careful with this little technique here, because it is an easy way to slip and cut yourself. Let's see if this will work with this sapling. Sometimes this works decent, and sometimes it don't work well with certain trees. Now, well, you can't see it, but this is a piece of green. There we go. Now it's mostly through. So now I can come in here and be mindful of what I'm doing with the blade. I'm not going to go hard. I'm going to go fairly easy, because I'm not going to risk my body to a slip and severely wound myself here, because this thing is fairly sharp. And if I make a boo-boo here, it could be catastrophically dangerous to my well-being, especially if I happen to nick an artery. There we go. All right. Now we're freed up. Now we can take the time, and I would recommend it just for the sake of the longevity of our pole here. If I'm going to use it for a walking stick, I'm going to clean this up and probably chamfer the tip of that a little bit. That'll help keep it from fraying and splitting out and all that. Yeah, that's a lot cleaner. And there we go. Like I said, we could either use this for part of a shelter component, or now we got us a walking stick to help us maintain our footing out here. All right, guys, we got this piece of pine here. She's been laying out here on the bunk for a while, so it's not completely dry, and it's a fairly old piece. See if we can get anything off this thing that would aid us in fire prep. Now, I will say this, the jimping on this thing is actually pretty aggressive, and that's actually kind of uncomfortable in the thumb. If you're the type that does wear gloves and you can use a knife wearing gloves, I guess that'd be fine. But I'd almost say take some very fine, maybe 1,000 grit sandpaper, gently rub over that till that's a little bit more smooth, because I mean, that'll show up. It's literally scratching the skin pretty good on my thumb there, just from doing this. You can definitely tell there's a good bit of moisture in that wood there. It's not like wet, but there's an added bit of resistance to it from the wood. I can feel it just by carving it. So that actually turned out pretty good. Those are pretty fine. Even those are, this is slightly damp wood. If you had a whole bunch of this feathered out, and you could get it out to where there's some airflow, I'd say these would dry out fairly fast. But as is, we can always just give it a quick check with a Bic. So yeah, that took off pretty easy. So that wouldn't have been too much trouble. Okay, guys, now I got a piece of branch off of a hardwood. Now, if you want, I mean, you could do the beaver chew, put pressure, do the beaver chew, or if you happen to carry a Victorinox and you got a saw, you can saw it off there. But this little technique here is I'm going to do, because, the question of being able to split some wood, usually comes in there. And like I said, this is pretty short blade and it's fairly thin. So I don't want to batten this. So we're going to take this knife, however, and we are going to carve ourselves a bit of a wedge. Let's get this bark off here. That's not going to be of any assistance to us to begin with. All right, guys, I'm going to work on this for a while and I'll get back to you. I got a bunch of hard knots in that, so that's going to be a bit of a chore to actually get this thing carved out. So I'll be back. Okay, now this piece is pretty tough, so it may be a chore to split this, but we're going to try it with this. If it doesn't work, always make another one or try to find a little bit bigger piece, make a wider, tougher one. So you readjust here, and I'll take it down to the edge of the bunk here. Got our wedge. I'm going to come out here on the far corner on this piece. Then any piece you can find laying on the ground to hammer with. Be careful not to hit yourself. All right, we got a piece working off here. I'm going to try to chase it down. Hopefully, my fingers are in the way, aren't they? There we go. And that gave us a far smaller, more manageable piece. There we go. Rip that off. So we can start getting into that thing, and the more we work in on that, we can get closer to the inside of it. All right, we've got these little pieces here, and we can break these down a little bit further if we need to. Find us a decent corner, and we can just kind of slowly start working on turning these into feather sticks. They're a little bit uneven on some spots, which may mean I have to break a few pieces off to start getting that to round out. Now again, with these, if they're still slightly damp, we can get these to set out, and they will dry, especially if we can get them kind of in the wind. But I'm starting to be able to get some very focus camera. Some very tiny little pieces like this, these little curly cues. And you get a whole bunch of these in a pile. If you've got a hat, maybe put your hat kind of mounts between your legs, carve them out. Where these actually shine is once you get these worked down to where there's a big a bushy pile of these, and you got some much thinner material left over that's connected with. That thinner material that it's connected with turns in part of your fire. So if you can be patient and work these down to they're fairly decently thin, and make a lot of these little curly cues come off that feather stick, it'll definitely help you with your fires. Now, too, a lot of people, I don't know if they're under maybe the misinterpretation of how you would do your fires with these. You don't just make one of these. In most cases, especially if it's a pretty serious situation. Let's see how much thinner that is. Now you want to try to get much longer strips if you can, but if you can't, you do what you can do. But you usually want anywhere from 20 to 30 of these in a bundle. You're going to slap these all together. You're going to get whatever ignition system you're using to get your fire, whether it be a lighter, flint and steel, ember from a bow drill, doesn't matter. And you get a whole bunch of these slapped together, and like I said, you definitely want to make these longer. If you got to, you can even come back here on a different section and make some more feather sticks behind it. Whatever you got to do, but you want to turn these into your feather sticks. You get my drift? No, you get about 20 to 30 of these, bundle them together, get that whatever you got to ignite them going, and the stick, the thinner part of the stick you got left over that these things are connected to will most likely start to catch and burn, and that's what gets your base of your fire going. So after this more easy to take a flame material catches on and starts burning, the thicker stuff catches on and starts burning, and then you start making some very small bed of embers. So if you're planning on doing feather sticks, keep in mind that you'll need several of these to give you a good fair shot, especially in pretty bad conditions. As far as carving goes, like I said, we need to be realistic here. I mean, this is not a carving knife. It'll work, but like a lot of knives that have these hollow grounds that are mostly made for skinning and processing animals, you don't want to go super deep. Take reasonable slices. That means the angle of your blade. If it's a real thin hollow grind, you'll want to more on a flatter plane to your material. Now, if you have it more of an angle like this, like you're trying to use a Scandi, what will happen is that hollow grind will want to dig in deep fast. So you'll want to watch the plane See if I can get you a decent view of what I'm talking about. Watch the plane. Kind of get a feel, use your knife, do a few practices, adjust the angle to where, we're getting decent little slivers. Okay, so now I got the angle. Say I was wanting to do a feather stick right here. I found the angle. So now I'm making feathers. Now if I'm wanting to just carve and chip away some wood, I'm going to change the angle again. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to see that larger chip I just took off right there. It's not super thick, but it's a good bit thicker than what those were. So now you get your angles, try to maintain them. Now the reason I'm saying not to go super thick in a lot of cases, and it's just a natural inclination for most people, as we're carving into that wood, when we get near the end, we tendency want to roll up to chip out that piece. And let's add in this scenario, it's cold out. I'd say it's freezing or maybe even a little colder out, and you've been out there for a while. This knife blade has gotten pretty cold, and you're digging in there, then you're chipping up. What you're doing is you're turning this thin thing, the region right here, wherever the blade happens to be, into the cut. And as you're going up, you're turning this into basically a fulcrum, using it like a lever. So all that force is going on that really thin edge, and you're twisting it. So another practice to do to help stop that, you take your hammer grip to where you're comfortable. Like I said, don't try to wear your hand out if you keep from it. But based on how the knife's performing and the wood you're working on, whereas you have the tendency to want to keep that thumb behind that while you're whittling. Now, if I'm just chipping chunks off, take that hammer grip. Obviously, make sure you're safe for, when the knife comes free. Come back, straight. Shove straight. Don't twist your wrist, because if you got that thumb back here, it's just like this more natural tendency to want to turn the blade up. So if it'll help you to keep from doing that, you may not need this technique, but that's fine if you don't. Get your knife in there, and it's more of a straight push. I'm pushing. There's no flick. And that will help you from turning your blade. Well, in closing, guys, the biggest point that I think I've been trying to make with these videos is where you get a more bushcraft appropriate blade. Say we got this guy versus this guy. Try to get them up where they're kind of comparable. Now, as you can definitely tell, one is beefier than the other. And this little Grow 121 here is more prone to be useful as a survival / bushycraft kind of knife. And I've used it for such for quite a while now, and I've put quite a bit of abuse to it. I mean, I have beaten the brakes off this knife, and it's D2 steel. It's not top of the line super steel, but like a lot of steels, if they're done right, then they're pretty good. So, this little guy is pretty close to this little guy, but I will assure you the difference in price is quite substantial. This case here cost several of these little guys right here. Now, point of fact being, it comes down to your skill level and understanding the geometry of your knife. To take in consideration the thickness of the steel, the width of the steel, the grind of the steel. Do you got a saber grind, high saber, mid saber? Do you got Scandi, hollow, flat? All those particular grinds have benefits and disadvantages depending on what you're fixing to do with it. Now, This knife, if we take this one in that little whipping I just had out, and we take it to the arena of skinning and processing game, this is going to blow the Ipengro right out of the water. Whereas the opposite's true in a bushcraft survival scenario. My Ipengro here is going to outperform this by leaps and bounds. But if you're careful, you can use bushcraft survival skills that you practice with your more appropriate fixed blade knife with to this one. You just have to limit what you're doing with it. Like I said, this is obviously a full tang knife, and we can see the tang all the way through there. However, the way this is made, especially if you look at the guard here, this is a component that could fail quite easily if you're battening this knife. Not to mention, you could most likely snap this blade. It's a pretty hard steel. You got, rock wheel close to around 60, 62. Thin, pretty extreme hollow grind. So if you're battening this and, add in the factor that if it's cold out and this blade is cold, there's a high probability you're going to snap the knife. And it's hard. And a lot of times, like, you get these jimpings. When these things fail, often, even some bushcraft survival knife with a lot of jimpings, if there is slightest bit of burr in the steel in any one of these little divots where these jimpings are, that will cause basically a fracture to form from the forces being applied. It will cause a micro tear. And if you keep on batting it, sometimes these things will shear off and break right here somewhere along one of these jimpings. It happens. Keep that in mind. Now, another cool thing is about, like I said, I'm a Kydex guy, but having a leather sheath, if it's properly maintained, if it's a good leather sheath, and this one's pretty decent, it's not too big and bulky, fits the knife perfectly, good snaps closure system. But if say you don't wear a leather belt, you have this nice thick welt area, and you can take your knives and hone it on that leather. Find there's a good spot right there. Nice and relatively flat. So if you've been using it a little bit, don't go heavy duty on your use before you stop and strop it back out. That'll help prolong it. Oh, there's a big branch. Oh, we're getting bald, but I'll cut some more for you guys. And just like that, hardly any pressure. And that was just a few. I haven't done anything to this to the test. That was the first time I touched it to anything to redo the edge on it since we did the test. And it still would have shaved hair about that few little strops on that leather. But point of fact is, it was just a simple way to touch the knife up. I wanted to show you guys. So I want everybody, if you would, watching, to maybe take in consideration what you can and can't do with your knives. And if you have any doubts about your own skill level, take these knives out, use some common sense and practice. See what you can do with knives that aren't necessarily made specifically for bushcraft and survival. In case you are, say, like I said, out there hunting, you do get into a bad situation, you happen to have a decent hunting knife on your side versus a bushcraft knife. See what you can do with it. See where the limitations are with your skills, with the limitation of the knife, and then if you practice, those levels will go up. You can do more with less. With that, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hype the video if you feel the need to, and I'll catch you in another one.